Death wears many faces and has many origins. Take this case in Duncan, Oklahoma, where street crime resulted in a white Australian athlete dead, two black teens charged with murder, a third charged with a lesser crime in the case, and the families grieving. Then, the story broadens. The victim is a 22-year-old promising baseball player from Melbourne, Australia. In Oklahoma on a scholarship, the alleged assailants, only 15, 16, and 17, say they're bored, and authorities say decide to hunt someone. Chris Lane, the athlete, was their prey. To examine events both at the surface and perhaps at the root, we are joined by Dr. Jody Armour, Dr. Jody Armour, a law professor at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He's also a scholar in critical race studies. Welcome, Dr. Armour.
It's very good to be with you, Andrew.
Let's start at the surface. What happened that day, and how do you understand events?
Well, unfortunately, it was, I think, best construed as a random act of violence, one of those tragic but all too common random acts of violence that we suffer in this gun-laden culture that we have here in America. We have a lot of guns, so we have youth that can sit around and simply say, I'm bored, let me find some outlet for entertainment. I have a gun, let me shoot it. You put guns, it's a volatile combination. Guns and, youth, 15, 16, 17, immature morally in a lot of ways. The brain studies show it takes us a while to get it together, even morally, on the kind of personal development charts. So, it was unfortunately a random act of violence, endemic in America, but nothing more than that. And I think that's what you and I are going to talk about. Does it have a deeper racial meaning?
We're certainly going to. What you said, though, reminded me of something I once heard comedian Bill Cosby say, which was that back in his day, there was a lot of anger, there was a lot of hate, there was a lot of hostility even. They just didn't have the guns, and that's why you didn't see these murders. How much weight do we put on having the tools?
Oh, yeah. The opportunities, when they're that accessible, are going to help to drive violent crime. Think about the Trayvon Martin case, violent death anyway. Think about the Trayvon Martin case. Without a gun involved in that case, you probably just have somebody who's bruised, somebody who's got a black eye, say, maybe a chipped tooth, but you don't have a dead person toe tag sitting in a morgue. And that's the difference between a culture that is saturated with guns as ours is, and one that has anger in it and all the other emotions, but not the easy, ready access to means to give expression to hot-headed, momentary flashes of anger.
And you called this earlier a random act of violence. Is that actually fair in that, according to the police chief of Duncan, Oklahoma, Duncan Ford, they were just bored and they wanted to see someone die. And apparently they saw this person jogging, and so they all got in a car and followed him and then shot him down in the back. Is that actually random?
It's gruesome. It's horrible to think about. It's a horrible act of violence, but I can't say that it is any more than that, given that, number one, they were going to do the same thing at another house, this time to a black victim, a black boy who called his dad, who called the police, who then came and arrested these three boys. That's how they got arrested. Number two, one of the boys was white, one of the boys was half black, half white, and one was black. So if there was any racial motivation, it wasn't in this case. They were clearly going after a black victim as well, and not all of them were black when they shot the white Australian baseball player. Although that's how the story has been spun here in America by some news outlets like Fox News, who want to make this a case that's making a racial statement to offset the Trayvon Martin case. They want to say, there really isn't, there's as much racism against whites in America as there is against blacks. So let's take this case and make it front and center and say, why aren't you as upset about these black kids shooting this white guy as you were about the Trayvon case, when the facts don't support the propaganda purposes they wanted to put the story to?
And yet, you certainly can understand why some people might believe there is a racial element when the sheriff trots out former tweets, one of the alleged perpetrators saying that, quote, 90% of white people are nasty, hate them. And other people are quoting things from a Chief Keef rap song called I Don't Like and saying it's time to start taking lives. And do you think that there is some element in there where they were looking to go after a white person, or from what you're saying, he just happened to be solo and so an easy victim?
Yeah, it looks like that in this case, right? Because the next victim they were going after was going to be a black victim. And that's why that black victim's dad called the police and got him apprehended in the first place. And on top of that, not all three of them were black. Only, one of them was, kind of, if you will, completely unambiguously black. One was biracial and one was white. So I think we can read sometimes too much into facts like this and looking for a racial motive. That's not to say that there is not real racial animosity out here in American social life, right? In civic life, and that there isn't a lot of that kind of talk going back and forth. The question is, did that kind of talk contribute to their motives to carry out this killing? And it doesn't appear in this case that it did.
And when we look at sort of hindsight judgments, looking at these tweets, how do we begin to parse out whether or not some of these comments are noise, are static, or if they really are stones that fit in a mosaic and a pattern of overall behavior and overall cultural scene?
Yeah, there is indeed a lot of tough, rough kind of language out there in the culture now. And a lot of it is tongue in cheek or ironic, but it's still barbed. And they're words that can wound sometimes. And we wonder, is there some connection between these words that wound and acts that wound and kill? Like we saw wherever we see such acts, and worry about this sort of thing. And then we start thinking also about, tattoos and the way people dress and the way their pants hang. And, kind of like words, they're all forms of symbolic communication, symbolic self-expression that seem to take a defiant stance toward the, kind of conventional, traditional society. But, I think it's important for us to recognize that this is part of pop and youth culture. Youth culture has always been kind of defiant toward their elders, saying, forget you, you messed it up. I'm going to do it my way and at least try to improve on what you did. That's part of youth culture. And so it's important not to take too much from youth culture and infer from someone's usage of youth culture that they are wicked really in their hearts. They may just be going along with the fashion of the time.
At the same time, though, I think all of us believe in vigilance and prevention. So what are the cues that sort of separate the white noise, the distractions, from the messages that we really ought to be paying attention to?
Yeah, we need to look at words coupled with actions. Words can be acts too, but when they start to lead to, for example, a certain kind of profiling or a certain kind of exclusion or targeting, or that if we see behavior that's accompanying the noise, then we have to intervene aggressively. On the other hand, we have to allow some room for words to just be out there because we believe in the value of freedom of expression. We say we want to give you as much elbow room as possible for your words and ideas. That way we can get the ideas out there to duel one another and see which is the better idea. So we want to maximize that interest in free speech while intervening when we see it leading to acts that can be harmful.
and want to move a little bit beyond this specific instance because when we report on this or when we talk about these instances or the instances of mass shootings that we've had recently, each one seems to provide a ripple and they can cause, it seems, inspiration to other people. Where is the responsibility? Where is the danger in how we communicate acts like these?
Oh, yeah, we can sensationalize them even in the reporting of them. We can report them straight ahead as news with a certain kind of context, or we can, in a way, almost glorify, romanticize, whatever you want to call it, the bad guy, if you will, and you see this kind of almost salacious attention to these crimes, which lead others to do copycat acts. And that's also one of the prices of free speech, unfortunately. We have to try to do what we can as responsible news outlets, as responsible commentators, et cetera. We have to do what we can to avoid sensationalizing and glamorizing the people who do these violent acts, while at the same time recognizing that we have to allow a lot of leeway for reporting on the details of these events.
And we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but the human animal is still basically a pack creature. And they seem to be one that likes to cling to their own groups and see other groups as other. How do we move up beyond that? And when does that interfere in a case like this, both in trying to prevent murders or from jumping to conclusions as to the origin of an act?
Yeah, we have to come to grips with the fact that we are probably even biologically wired to think about in groups versus out groups in different ways, to look out for in group members more than out group members. And there are a lot of social psychological studies that suggest that when we are dealing with in group members, we're more empathetic, we feel their pain more, we have more care and concern for those who are in our group than for others, than for outsiders. One thing we need to do, one of the places I developed some of my closest friendships with white males was on my basketball team, because we were involved in a common enterprise, a common project that was above the racial lines. So I think we need to find ways to expand the concentric circles of usness, of the in group, so that it encompasses more and more of those who used to be out group. Here in the US, for example, we're allowing more and more. We're seeing, gay, lesbian, the LGBT community is one of us as part of the in group. And we're starting to expand laws that vindicate that broader circle of care and concern. So yeah, I think that the solution is to get this in-group circle to encompass more and more people who are right now excluded from the in-group, so we can start to give them the care and concern we give to the ones that are already in the in-group.
I think another very important factor is the fact that human beings not only are pack animals, but being intelligent animals, we really like to make sense of things. We like to pull things into patterns. I think that's why at the beginning of the conversation, I was talking about mosaics. Is this incident where these three people went out to shoot someone, is it part of a mosaic or is it a single stone? And even you're calling it a random act, but my mind wants to put it into a whole. It wants to put it into a puzzle so that I can make sense, so that I can work it. Is that a danger?
It can be, but it's also it's a blessing and a curse, but it's more a blessing, I think, than curse to seek answers and explanations. And that's all you're doing. And we should all do, looking for the pattern behind things. And all I'm saying now is that the struggle over what this is a symptom of is also part of a political process. Fox News is saying that this particular case involving this Australian baseball player attacked by these three youths is proof that whites in America are being oppressed and harmed by blacks just as much as blacks are being oppressed or harmed by whites. Even though the statistics and everything else argue to the contrary, the incarceration rate, the unemployment rate, but blacks are much higher rate of unemployment, higher rate of poverty, incredibly high rates of mass incarceration, are suffering stop and frisk and profiling, et cetera. Even though there's all that data there, the Fox News kind of hermetically sealed world believes that whites are the most discriminated against group in America. And so they take cases like this and say it's part of that pattern. It's a symptom of that. And I think it's important for us to say, no, if it doesn't quite fit, it may not be a symptom of that, but it may have another explanation. For example, gun culture, as we were talking about before, Andrew, right? And it has other connections that make it understandable, intelligible, meaningful without tying it into that politically contentious narrative that you want to tie it into.
Looking at tragedy, prevention, and the way that threads link together. For The Voice of Russia, I'm Andrew Hiller, and I've been speaking with Dr. Jody Armour. He's a law professor at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He's also a scholar in critical race studies.